The Wreck, written by Craig Groshek, narrated by Otis Jiry. Daniel and Thomas had been hunting since dawn. They were tired and cold, and had not seen a deer for days. They'd walked for miles following tracks and watched for signs of deer, but they still had no luck. The two traveled further from their cabin each day, hoping their luck would be better. One chilly November afternoon, they had walked deeper and deeper into the forest till they reached a spot they had never seen before. Overhanging pines blotted out the sun, and soon they lost all track of time. Noticing how dark it had become, Thomas said to Daniel, "We've walked far enough for one day. We should turn around now, or we'll be out here all night." "No," Daniel protested. "The cabin is miles away by now, and it's so dark now, I'm not sure where we are. Let's make camp here and we'll head back in the morning." "No," Thomas replied. "I'm cold and tired and we've got nothing to eat. You can stay here if you want, but I'm going home." The men had just parted ways, and Daniel had only begun to set up his tent when a piercing screech tore through the forest just a few hundred yards from where they stood. This was followed by a thunderous crash and a deafening thud, which shook the trees about them. Neither of the men had heard anything like it before. Thomas rushed back at once. "Did you hear that?" he cried. "I did," replied Daniel. "What do you think it was?" "I don't know, but I think we should find out." The two headed in the direction of the sounds. Soon they came upon an unfamiliar road. It was made of packed gravel and weaved through the forest. Darkness swallowed the road in both directions. It was dreadfully quiet, and the men were scared. But they did not know where they were, and so walked along it for a while. They had gone only a mile or so before they grew restless. The sun had nearly set by then, and they were farther from the cabin than before. Daniel was very afraid. "Tom," he said, "I don't know about this. We've got to go back." "No," Thomas replied. "You can go if you want. I'm going to see where this leads." And Thomas walked on. Daniel was afraid to go on, but more afraid to go back, and he wasn't sure where he had left his tent, so he stayed with Thomas. They walked a bit further and came upon a great plume of smoke blowing in the wind. They smelled oil. Soon they came around a bend in the road and came upon a most horrible sight. An 18-wheel semi-trailer had lost control on the gravel, swerved from the road and hit a thicket of trees, and was overturned. Thomas and Daniel raced to the driver's side of the vehicle. Daniel slipped and fell, and in horror found himself lying in a stream of blood which ran along the length of the truck. Thomas helped him up, and they hurried on. They found a man, unconscious, pinned beneath the truck. His bearded face was ashen, his hands pressed against the truck, as if he had attempted to free himself. Believing the man to be dead, Thomas and Daniel approached him. Daniel crouched beside the man and leaned in to examine him more closely. Suddenly the driver awoke with a start and grabbed Daniel by the wrist. The man's hand was cold as ice. He did not say a word, but looked Daniel in the eye. The hunter shuddered. It was decided then that Thomas should run back to the cabin to phone for help, while the other stayed behind. In a moment, Daniel was alone with the dying man. He did not like it one bit. Something about the unfortunate man chilled him, but he could not tell what. But he waited, and still Thomas had not returned, and the driver's condition began to worsen. His face was now bluish, his arm limply slung to his side, and his breathing had all but stopped. His eyes rolled back into his head. Daniel feared he would die in minutes if something was not done, and so he took off running to seek help as well. But first, he took off his bloodied jacket and wrapped it around the man for warmth, as by now he was stone cold. In desperation, the injured driver clutched the jacket in his hands and shivered violently. Daniel ran until he came to the paved road. Luckily, he recognized this as the main road which would lead back to his cabin. He hurried along. By the time he reached the cabin, it was pitch black outside, and he found Thomas sitting on the front step waiting for help. Thomas had called for an ambulance, but so far up in the city, it would take some time for help to arrive. The men decided they would need to help the man themselves, and so they gathered supplies and left again. Though they found the gravel road weaving through the woods as before, and what they swore was the same curve in the road, they could not find any sign of an accident. Shaken, the men continued searching for the better part of an hour with no luck. It seemed the truck and its driver had disappeared entirely. Just then they heard an ambulance in the distance and headed back toward the sound. Soon they were back at their cabin, where they again explained to the police what had happened. In moments, the men were escorting the police and 2 men with a stretcher through the woods to the site of the accident. They came to the gravel road and followed it, and the road came to an end. Confused, Thomas and Daniel looked about, but sure enough, the road stopped, much sooner than it had before. It made no sense at all. Where moments ago it had gone for miles through the forest, there was nothing but fallen trees and brush. The area looked the same, but the gravel path had disappeared. The police officer was visibly upset. "How dare you drag us out here for nothing?" the officer said. "Where is this truck of yours?" "It was here, I swear," Thomas cried. "It was right here." The hunters looked about for a moment longer and had nearly given up when Daniel's feet became tangled in something cold and wet. He fell to his knees and looked down. Horrified, he scrambled back to his feet. There, caught between his legs, was his jacket, covered inside and out with blood. Everyone gathered around the jacket as Daniel turned it over. Thomas cried out, "Would you look at that?" On either side of the jacket, frozen in place by the chilly November air, were 2 bloodied handprints, much larger than any of the men's hands. The truck and its driver were never found, and though they searched for it every hunting season, the gravel road they had walked upon never appeared again. The jacket was taken as evidence, but later returned, and though it was washed and the blood removed, Daniel never wore it again, not even in the summer, for every time he put it on he would feel 2 hands, cold as ice, pressed against his back.